as we're moving along with the Next Gen 911 implementation, really discovering new sort of key findings, lessons learned as PSEPs have implemented with not only AT&T, but other Next Gen 911 providers across the state. So really wanting to get that message out to you all as you prepare for your own individual Next Gen 911 projects, either with AT&T or whoever your chosen Next Gen 911 provider is. So again, just want to thank you all for joining us here today. The topics will be general. They won't be sort of regional specific. So really speak up if there's any questions, but really hoping to have a sort of open dialogue with everyone here today, in addition to the talking points that we have. I am joined here with AT&T's assigned program manager, Troy Mullis. If you want to introduce yourself, please.
Morning, everybody. Afternoon, actually. Troy Mullis. I am with AT&T Consulting and currently serving as your program lead for the AT&T eAssignment deployment. So I'll be talking with a few of you, but probably all of you at some point off and on, whether it's in a project call or whatever the case may be along the way. So if you ever have an issue that you can't get resolved, or just have a general question, I'm always available. So don't hesitate to give me a call.
Recording.
Yes, I just do. It's recording.
Thank you. All right. So before we dive into today's topics, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the agenda, sort of the things that we want to cover here today. Obviously did very basic introductions. I'll also talk a little bit about the Office of Emergency Communications within Department of Military Affairs, just giving a brief overview of who we are as an office before I go into more of a Next Gen 911 program overview. Some of the things we're doing within the Next Gen 911 program above and beyond kind of the administration of the AT&T contract. We'll talk a little bit about some upcoming grant opportunities, as well as our GIS data management service contract we recently signed with Keocom. And then we will talk a little bit about where we're at with the existing implementation with AT&T, those PSEPs that have been onboarded so far to the network, as well as some key numbers related to the not only the EZNet implementation, but also the ECATS reporting system, which is included as part of that. And then, as I mentioned, as PSEPs have gone through this whole process, we've identified some of the some lessons learned, key findings, some things to anticipate as you're going through your installation, your migrations, your operational readiness testing, and hopefully keep you all informed on some of those individual things that we're not only seeing, I guess, from a nationwide perspective, just with the standards and the different changes between the legacy system into the Next Gen 911 system, but also some of the things that we're seeing just from a Wisconsin environment perspective. A lot of call handling vendors, a lot of different selective router vendors. So I think we have a very unique scenario here, and really wanting to share some of those key findings we have from that perspective. I think we'll have time at the end for questions. I don't think hope this won't go the full 3 hours. I don't want to bore you all to death, but all very good information that I hope will help prepare you as you're going through your own Next Gen 911 implementation. So we'll wrap up at the end and answer any remaining questions you may have, but feel free to speak up as they come. And then Allison is monitoring the chat throughout, and if anything comes up through that platform, we will also be answering those. Great. So to start, hopefully everyone can see the screen. Some of the lettering may be a little bit small, but we will be distributing these slides after the session, as well as the recording. If it turns out, you never know with Teams recording what's going to come across on that. So our intent, though, is to share a recording of the session as well. So just from a general overview of the Office of Emergency Communications, OEC for short, we are a relatively small office within the Department of Military Affairs, operating as a direct report to the Adjutant General, Paul Knapp, for the state of Wisconsin. As I mentioned, a relatively new office within the last, less than 10 years old for sure, a little older than 5 years, I believe. But we do have a number of program areas that have recently been more developed, I think, as we were starting, just trying to figure out who we were as an office, but now moving into sort of how we are operating as an office and as a program. We do have several key program areas in addition to Next Gen 911. But to start Next Gen 911, I am the program manager. I oversee that program within the Office of Emergency Communications, but I also work very closely with Zach Hassler, who's joined us here today, our GIS specialist, who is spearheading the GIS portion of Next Gen 911 implementation, as well as Grant Growalski in the back. If you have a chance to chat with him, he is our grant specialist managing the grant programs we have available for Next Gen 911 services. Also within our office, we have the public safety broadband and interoperability program area. This is really coordinating training and exercises and key interoperability initiatives across the state for incorporating interoperable communications in live events, exercises, trainings, all sorts of things. Margaret Zeke heads up that program and keeps herself very busy just with all of the different nuances that come with emergency communications and making sure everyone can talk to each other. And then we also have our WISCOM program. For those unfamiliar with WISCOM, it is our statewide P25 VHF interoperable radio system that's used for both daily use by a number of counties as well as interoperable use across the state. And that actual system administrator position is currently pending recruitment. Hope to fill that position as well, and then implementing a new system for WISCOM as well. And all of those program areas report up to Molly Boss, our section chief, who oversees all of our programs. She's also here today. If anyone's curious who really runs the office, to be fair. And then she is a direct report to Eric Veal, who is appointed by the Attorney General. He is the Director of Emergency Communications, as well as the statewide interoperability coordinator and our strategic leader for the office. And as I mentioned, he reports directly to the Adjutant General and is also appointed by the Adjutant General. And all of that is to say we are, while a small office, we do operate some very large systems. I think we increased the Department of Military Affairs budget by, I don't know, 30%. It's an insane amount of work that goes into such a small office, but very happy to have the opportunity to now be called the Office of Emergency Communications. And I think we're now getting the visibility that's required for this very important initiative. So before I kind of dive into our more technical topics, I always like to set a baseline of kind of what is Next Gen 911. There's many, many different definitions. Our own statute actually defines Next Gen 911. The National Emergency Number Association also has a definition for 911 or Next Gen 911. So really just wanting to, again, set a baseline, make sure we're all kind of on the same page as far as how we're viewing Next Gen 911 here in Wisconsin. And so really at a base level, NG9 is upgrading your legacy 911 systems that run off of selective routers and old circuit-based technologies and moving into a more IP-based environment, utilizing what's known as an emergency services IP-based network, or ESINet, or ES9net, however you want to say that acronym. But essentially, the ESINet is that backbone network that will interconnect all of the PSAPs to be able to transfer calls interchangeably between the PSAPs, as well as really enhancing the technologies that PSAPs are able to use and that citizens are able to contact 911 with. That's not to say that we would be implementing, say, pictures and videos, but the Next Gen 911 system as an IP-based network is able to now process new forms of data in addition to the 911 calls that are coming through. Think integrated text to 911 is probably the most common new form of data that will be transported through the ESINet connections. So being able to, rather than have an over-top solution that is operating off an entirely separate system, your text messages can now come through that network. Into the future, when we're looking at more enhanced technologies, easier ways for the citizens to contact 911, I think there's an expectation that, maybe 911 should be able to take my pictures and videos from the public. That's not to say that that's the PSAP's perspective, but, from a network perspective, we're capable of now doing that. being able to transmit that information across the network. And so as standards become more developed, as PSAPs begin to look at this from an operational perspective, this is something that the new network is capable of doing. And we do like to think of Next-Gen 911 as having three key components. The first is being that EZNet and Next-Gen Core Services, which is the functional elements that route a 911 call and actually get a call to the PSAP. It is also the backbone network that, as I mentioned, interconnects all of the PSAPs across the state. And with the new network, you're also able to connect to other Next-Gen 911 systems, which in the past, old legacy systems, selective routers didn't typically connect and didn't typically transmit calls between each other. So really getting past that limitation with this new IP-based network. The second, I would say, key component is the PSAP equipment readiness. This is making sure that PSAP's equipment is able to process this new data. So updating to the Next-Gen 911 standards in order to take in this new type of information that the EZNet is providing. Typically that will be really software, making sure that you're upgrading your software and that you have your IP licenses for recording, things like that. And Troy will touch on that a bit as well during his portion of the presentation. And then, last but not least is the standardized GIS data. We've been working on that a couple of years now, and first starting with a gap analysis back in 2020, and now with a more extended, fuller contract with Geocom to provide that GIS data management service to make sure that the data that's being used to route 911 calls is as accurate as possible. So getting that into a standardized format is really essential for Next-Gen 911 as well. And a couple of years ago, the Department of Military Affairs was tasked by the legislature and the governor to implement Next-Gen 911 on a statewide basis to contract for the network necessary for PSAPs to begin implementing this new technology. And so that's what we went and did and contracted with AT&T for that statewide EZNet. And I'll talk a little bit about that contract in a moment. As I mentioned, there are standards for Next-Gen 911, the National Emergency Number Association, or NENA. As many of you know, it does set the standard for Next-Gen 911 services on a nationwide basis. A majority, if not all of the states, are moving forward with Next-Gen 911 and are following the NENA I3 standard for this new technology. The NENA I3 standard also covers not only the network itself, but also the GIS data that goes into the network, and very robust set of standards that is organized through that association made up of stakeholders throughout the nation. Right, so now that everyone hopefully knows at a high level what Next-Gen 911 is, I did just want to briefly talk about what does the Next-Gen 911 program do? What do we do on a day-to-day basis? Our statutory responsibilities are in Wisconsin statute 256.35. So that sets out the statewide emergency number system as 911, as well as identifies duties for Department of Military Affairs to implement Next-Gen 911, as well as coordinate this on a statewide basis. More specifically, the statute does task DMA with administering the contracts related to Next-Gen 911, being, again, providing that network for the PSAPs to begin implementing this new technology. So we went out and did a request for proposal a number of years ago and signed a contract with AT&T, and now really implementing, getting started on that project. So my primary responsibility is to administer that contract for the office and in coordination with everyone else working on the Next-Gen 911 network, as well as the program. In addition to that contract, we also have, as I mentioned, Geocom's GIS data management service. So we are also responsible for managing that contract. So really any sort of contracts that impact statewide Next-Gen 911 services, our office will be responsible for administering. We also are responsible for determining the Next-Gen 911 operational date for each county. I won't bore you with the details, but it essentially tasks the Department of Military Affairs to work with each county and identify when Next Gen 911 will truly become operational within the county. And at that point, there are impacts. The statute identifies impacts to the legacy system contracts that you currently have in place with your legacy providers, and the landline 911 surcharges as well. So once that operational date is identified, that is really what starts the clock for some of those legacy systems to start becoming phased out. I'm going to skip the last point, and I'll come back to that. But some other program initiatives, as I mentioned, the statute does have a lengthy list of departmental duties, but generally we are responsible for strategic planning and coordination of Next Gen 911 services, not only with AT&T, but also working with the counties that have implemented Next Gen 911 with other providers as well. We also do some federal and state reporting for 911 fee usage. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, is heavily involved in what 911 fees are used for across the states, and does have a process each year where they request information about what the 911 fees are being used for, and ultimately make a determination of whether or not the state is diverting those fees to other purposes outside of 911. And a good segue into my next slide, just wanted to mention, we also manage the grant programs at both the primarily the state level right now, but when federal 911 funding becomes available, we typically will apply for that and become the state administering agency for any federal grants related to 911. We do currently have 2 state grant programs for NG911, the PSAP and the GIS grant program, which, as I mentioned, is a good segue into my next talking point. Everyone, I'm sure, is very interested in grants. It's a great opportunity to be able to afford a lot of this new equipment, and really being able to standardize not only the equipment at the PSAP, but also the GIS data that is involved in this. So as I mentioned, we do have two grant programs. The first being the Chapter DMA2 PSAP grant program, which is available to 1 designated PSAP per county that is either designated by the county board or the Intergovernmental Cooperation Council. A majority of the counties have made that determination as far as who the designated PSAP is within a county. As well as under Chapter DMA2, which is in reference to an administrative rule, there are other eligibility requirements related to that PSAP grant program that get into more service standards, basic training standards to really elevate the training and really standardizing the services across the state. So all of those need to be met in order to be eligible for the Chapter DMA2 PSAP grant program. And then secondly, we do have our NG911 GIS grant program. This grant is specific to county land information offices that are operating in counties that are implementing Next Gen 911. As you'll see in a couple slides, we actually have all of the counties now either pursuing Next Gen 911 with AT&T or with another vendor. So all counties are virtually eligible for this Next Gen 911 GIS grant program, which is essential for preparing GIS data for Next Gen 911 purposes, the data creation, remediation, things necessary for cleaning up the data to get to that standardized GIS data format necessary for the network itself. We do anticipate both of these grant programs to be annual. They are set out in statute, and the legislature, as of this last biennium, has allocated funds to each of those grant programs. We anticipate that to remain the same, but of course at the liberty of the legislature and the governor to actually allocate funds to those grant programs. But our intent would be to release a funding announcement for each of these each year going into the future. Our first funding round was actually fiscal year 23. So two years ago, I believe, we issued over 5.7 million grant dollars to the PSAP grant program, as well as $1.07 million to the GIS grant program. There was $6 million available under the PSAP grants and $1.5 million available under the GIS grant. And really similar funding levels for fiscal year 24 as well. Another 5.7 million in fiscal year 24 for the PSAP grant, and then 1.48 million. So a bit of an increase actually in the GIS grant program for fiscal year 24. We unfortunately did have to deny quite a few applications in this last round, not because that the projects weren't meaningful and that they weren't important, but because we just simply ran out of funds. We had just too many funds requested, and so the good news is for fiscal year 25, the legislature and the governor actually allocated a significant increase to both of the grant programs. The PSAP grant program was increased to 18 million, and the GIS grant program was increased to 6 million available. So our hope is to really be able to fund as many projects as possible, and you know, our hope is really not denying anyone that has an eligible grant project in this next round. And for anyone interested, or eligible, if you plan to apply, we do have some upcoming workshops that will be a good avenue for information related to the upcoming application process. We do anticipate funding announcements coming out relatively shortly. So GrowALC will actually be hosting those workshops on April 16th. I think the PSAP grant workshops at 10 a.m. and the GIS one is at 1 p.m. So anybody that's interested in applying for those or just learning more information about those grant programs, he will be hosting those workshops next week, I believe Tuesday. Feel free to reach out to him or myself if you want more information about those workshops or if you have any questions about the grant programs themselves. But the OEC website, I think it's oec.wi.gov, does have the grant workshop information on the event calendar if you're interested in attending that. And then last couple of slides here before I transition over to Troy. I just wanted to touch briefly on GIS as it relates to NextGen 911. I'll talk specifically about the contract here, but at a high level, GIS data is really used to be able to route the call to the proper PSAP the first time around. Today, you use your ALI databases and ESNs to route calls, and it's really dependent on the other vendors' systems. And so in NextGen 911, we're able to use the GIS data, the information coming from the caller's handset, and being able to route the call based on that caller's location to the correct PSAP based on the GIS data where the boundaries are set for PSAP's jurisdictional boundaries of what calls are you answering within that boundary. So in order to help kind of provide tools and resources to GIS folks across the state, we did contract with GeoCom and finalized our contract earlier this year, and are now moving forward with that part of the project. I think this will be a really good opportunity to have those discussions about who's responding or who's answering calls along your bordering areas. If you've had issues in the past with say tower sites misrouting calls to your PSAP, this is a good opportunity to work with your GIS folks to understand where calls will be routed in a NextGen 911 system. And PSAP boundaries don't always reflect county or jurisdictional boundaries, just for operational purposes. So these are the types of discussions that GeoCom can help with. More specifically, the GeoCom contract does provide NextGen 911 quality assurance and quality control checks, really checking the data sets against the NENA I3 standard and the standards necessary for routing calls within the NextGen 911 system. And it takes that data from the local level, reviews it against that standard, and provides back a report that shows kind of what are the errors, what are the gaps and overlaps within the network or within the data sets that need to be fixed in order to properly route a call within the system. And so through their GIS data hub, that resource is now available to all counties, not only on the AT&T EZNet, but also any county moving forward or has moved forward with another NextGen 911 provider. It's really not limited to the AT&T contract. It also, in addition, I think the hot topic is the ALI and MSAG synchronization to the GIS data. The contract will also include pretty much unlimited ALI to MSAG synchronizations, comparing it against the against your data layers for that, I believe 98% accuracy that we're really looking for in order to properly route a call based on that GIS data. And ultimately, once all of the counties have really packaged up their data and it's in a nice, NINA I3 format, we'll be able to standardize and aggregate that data set to a statewide level. I think this will provide a lot of benefit just operationally, across borders, being able to kind of see each other's data sets, all being in the same standardized format will really be beneficial moving forward. And hopefully provide more information to not only the PSAPs, but potentially emergency responders that are really looking at the maps and other things. So we're hoping that sort of a trickle down effect with the standardization of data at the statewide level, that you see positive impacts to this in other areas of your operations. As I mentioned, there's the NINA I3 standard. There's also the data model from NINA for NextGen 911 GIS data. GeoCom is also responsible for providing recommendations and making updates to the Wisconsin version of that standard, really utilizing the Wisconsin Land Information Association's task force on NextGen 911 to provide us with really key insights into how their operations are impacted by the standards we're developing at the state level. And so GeoCom helps facilitate those discussions. I think our first version of that was published back in like 2020, 2021. So it was due for an update. NINA did update their data model, and so we are going through that process today. If you have any questions about that standards update, Zach Kassler would be happy to have discussions with you all on that. Among other things, I listed sort of the key things on this slide. There are a plethora of other things that are being offered through the GeoCom contract. They're really here to provide face-to-face support with each of the counties that are going through this process, and really the interface between the counties who are working on their data to then get it into the AT&T EGDMS system, which is actually used by the EZNet to route the calls. So there's sort of that interface between the counties and AT&T. Or another NextGen 911 program. And then last, on just the key points here, we are looking at having a web-based status map available to everyone. I provide regular updates at the 911 subcommittee meeting, at the Interoperability Council. I make it out to some of the key conferences, but for those of you who are in between those conferences or in between those meetings and interested in seeing, where we're at with the project, we're looking at developing some project-based status maps that will help communicate where we're at with the project, not only from the EZNet perspective, but we're looking at GIS data, as well as potential status map on who was awarded grants, how much funding is available, things like that. So stay tuned for that. It wasn't ready for this session, unfortunately, but we will be posting that to our website and likely sending out a link to everyone once that becomes available. And if you're looking, once you do see those, if there's any suggestions on how we can improve the status maps, different key points that you want to see reflected within the status map, we're always open to that and can make changes as needed. So if any GIS folks, PSAPs that are interested in learning more about the GeoCom contract and some of the services available through that, Zach Kassler is here today. Otherwise, he's available through email or phone call to get you all started with GeoCom. And then before I get into the EZNet status stuff, I did just want to pause quick to see if there's any questions here in the room or on the chat. Okay. Very good. Okay. Well, I'm going to give a more high-level, pretty map of where we're at with NextGen 911 implementation here in Wisconsin before I pass it up to Troy to give more specific AT&T data points on where they're at with the actual network implementation. So as I mentioned, all counties have officially either signed up with AT&T or another NextGen 911 provider to implement this service across the state, as well as any primary police department PSAPs that currently receive 911 calls. All of them have officially signed up, again, either through AT&T or another NextGen 911 provider. I don't believe we have any secondary PSAPs signed up yet. Those will be discussions we're gonna have heading into the future, how do calls get from a primary PSAP to a secondary PSAP? And really what does that operation look like in Next Gen 911? But the good news is eventually every call that's answered in Wisconsin will be running off of a Next Gen 911 system. So very, very excited to hit that milestone. As I mentioned, we have plans to transform this map into that live status map we'll have online on the OEC website. So hopefully to provide you more accurate, up-to-date information on where we're at, because with now Troy on board, we've been steaming along the last couple of weeks, and so it's been hard to keep up on everything in the status map. So I'm hoping that that by doing that, we'll be able to keep you all informed. I think that is really essentially all I wanted to say on this slide. Just a overall perspective, we're looking at 14, maybe 15 PSAPs live on an Next Gen 911 system at this point. Some with AT&T, again, some with other Next Gen 911 providers across the state, but I'm very excited to start seeing this map fill in. The other colors on here really just show the status of where counties are at in terms of their individual projects with AT&T, whether they have an active project or if they're still in sort of the data collection phase. Yes.
Can you go through the colors and what they all mean?
Yeah.
I can't see that first.
No worries. And again, we'll be sending out the slides too. So dark blue really indicates that they've signed an AT&T participation agreement that they have agreed to move forward with AT&T. They may still be in the data collection phase. They haven't been assigned a project manager yet. I think we do have a couple of PSAPs still kind of in that boat, either waiting for funding through the grant program to really get started, or they're in queue for that project management. The teal color, which is a majority of the state at this point, have an active AT&T EZNet project. So they're either, they've been assigned a project manager, they've had their kickoff meeting, they've gotten through the data collection process, they're maybe getting their site survey scheduled. AT&T is working on getting the connections made at their PSAP, getting the traffic, identifying the traffic at the selective router, all of those things that kind of go into the individual projects. So those have active ongoing projects at that point. The light lime green, we'll say, is the counties live on the AT&T EZNet. The dark green is PSAPs that have gone live with other EZNet providers. We also have Synergem, as well as PFN and Digital operating in the state. So we'll be making either network connections with them moving into the future, or looking at how we can make sure that there's interoperability between those systems. And then the one yellow county, they have signed with another EZNet provider. They just have yet to implement Next Gen 911 with that provider. And there's a couple of stars to reflect the municipal PSAPs as well, and just their status. So any questions before I pass it off to Troy to get into more AT&T specific information? Yes.
What would be the benefit of a county signing up not with AT&T? I've noticed that there are a couple on there that have gone with other vendors, so to speak.
Yeah, so the question was, why have the other PSAPs gone with other Next Gen 911 providers? I think it was timing at first. We took a couple of years. Of course, the AT&T the RFP and the contract negotiations happened at the height of COVID, and we just could not move fast enough for the PSAPs that were really at end of life with their selective routers. Their vendor had come and said, you know, we are no longer providing services, so they had to move forward. So unfortunately, it had to do with timing and really just an individual choice. I did want, thank you for bringing that up. I did want to mention Next Gen 911 is not required. You are not required to implement Next Gen 911 at all. The statute does not require counties or municipalities to make this decision. It's really up to you all as a home rule state to make sure that you're making the choices that are beneficial to your community. So there is no deadline. There's no statutory requirement for this. I will say it will get harder and harder to ignore. Every vendor is moving towards Next Gen 911. I'm sure you're getting emails from your selective router owners saying that they're end of life, they're no longer maintaining things. So this is really just where the industry is moving as a whole. That's not to say the legislature may not require it in the future. It's just not something that is currently required. All right. Any other questions? Very good. Well, thank you all. I'm going to pass it off to Troy to give some more specific information.
Okay,
Yeah, right.
gotcha. Got to teach the telephone guy practical stuff. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. Again, my name is Troy Mullis. I'm the program lead for AT&T ESI Net Deployment. I do want to say how much I appreciate the DMA putting this all together, inviting us to come, get to share some updates with you all, take some questions if you have any, and take concerns, whatever the case may be. Before I get into the status, I do want to say the status itself, this is all based on the grants. So what we try and do when we look at our schedules and we look at everything that we need to achieve in a period of time, we consider the grants that are in motion a little more priority. That way everybody can try and meet their deadlines and we don't put everybody in a bind there. So on top of what Jessica was explaining about the grants, I do want to throw that out there and let everybody know we totally take that into consideration when we build our go lives from a date perspective and a rollout perspective. Okay. Now what that doesn't mean is that everybody else goes on the back burner. That is not the case. We do have several sites that are being scheduled in line with sites in the grant deadline schedule. Almost some of them are even the same day. So we're working everybody in tandem. But if you're in a grant situation, just know that we're kind of looking at you guys to make sure we don't put you in a bad spot. Okay. All right. So let's go through where we're at today. This is all high level, by the way. It's all in flux. Even some of these percentages may have changed as of, a week or so ago, but this is a good high level overview, an example of where we're at. Okay. So from an AT&T ESI Net perspective, right now we have 10 PSAPs. That's roughly 11% of the total sites that will be deployed in the state of Wisconsin. Our ABPN egress network, and so that's the IP network that connects ESI Net to the PSAPs on ESI Net. Right now, we've got about 56 of the total sites that will be deployed installed. We're working through that. There are a series of challenges that we work through daily to get your network in place. Some go really easy, some go really hard. Some are really challenging, but we're working through that daily. So again, we're about 56%. Again, this changes daily as we're rolling through and completing more and more as the weeks go. Edge router completions. This is with sites that we have actual go live dates assigned to. And the edge routers are the ESI Net routers that we come to your site, we install in your back room, and then we take these ABPN, which really just stands for AT&T VPN circuits. We tie them to the edge routers out there. So that's the interface where we hand off to your CPE providers. And, it would really just be your CPE providers at that point. But we're about 10% of those. And some of that is in regards to getting all of our circuits in there. So we're working to get with you folks at the sites, get those scheduled as the ABPNs are completing, to get those racked and stacked, stood up on the network. And then we start working with your CPE providers to get them interfaced with that network so everybody's on net. Okay, and then right now, the migrations that we have assigned to project managers, we're about 79% of the total sites that will be deployed. So again, we will watch this weekly. Bryce Jacoby, who's in the room with me today, he and I partner on this, and we work that aggressively to try and stay ahead of the curve as we work through deployment. Okay, so that's AT&T eAssignment. Before I go to ECATS, any questions on the AT&T eAssignment status? Anybody? Good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ECATS, and I'm going to assume that everybody knows what ECATS is, but let me just throw a really high-level overview of what it is. It's a bolt-on for managed information service reports. So it's basically an analytics system that's taking pictures of all your calls and gives you an opportunity to go onto a portal and pull down reports, look at your call volumes, time and date of a particular call, all of that. And so we're providing that as in relationship with a contract with the state as well. We're working through that to install ECATS at all of our sites. Currently, we have 3 completions, and we're hoping to get caught up with that 10%. And then the project plan that we have in place is as we move forward, we're hoping these numbers start coinciding closer together, if not spot on. So as we're completing sites, we're also completing ECATS. So we're doing a few things to improve that just a little bit. And we're expecting those to come together. But right now we're about 3%, 3 PSAPs. That should go up here shortly. And then the RDDM device is installed, 44% of the total sites. So this RDDM device is just it's just a device that mounts in a rack in your back room. And then your CPE connects to that box. And then ECATS has a load that goes to their cloud. And that's how they collect the calls out of your site. So that's just a piece of hardware that really captures all of that data locally so that it can be put and processed in their cloud. Okay. So 44% of those are installed. And here's a good catch for you folks, because I'll be talking about this a little further down into the slideshow here. 17% of those with RDDMs installed are still awaiting CDR connectivity from your CPE. And this is really important because this can make or break us in our ECATS rollouts. So that's where your CPE providers would run a connection, hook up to that RDDM so we can get that call data out of your CPE. We've had a few challenges with that, whether it be coordinating with your CPE vendors or getting them to actually have time to get that done. So we'll be talking a little more about that. But that's kind of why you see this number's a little lower from the number of installed devices we have. We've got a few challenges there, and we'll be talking with you folks about that a little bit more. And by the way, CDR is just called detail records. It's just a log of calls that come out of the CPE and get processed into these devices. CDR also feeds a lot of your CAD systems from your CPE. It could also interface with your long-term recorders. You know, a lot of you nowadays would log into your long-term recorders and look up calls, and it's got an alley in there and all that good stuff. That all comes from the CDR spill out of your CPE. Okay, and then where we do have CDR in place, 14% of the total sites with the RDDMs installed are currently testings in progress. That's all underway. So the ECATS team goes through, they look at the CDR data, they test it with all of the reports and how it's populating the database. There could be certain elements of the CDR that might not be coming across properly, which would flaw your reports. So that's a testing phase that they go through before they get with you all and schedule training. Okay. So that's the overview on the ECATS progress as of today. Any questions there?
I have a question from the chat.
Yes.
Really matters. Are there any GIS considerations we need to account for regarding ECATS, or is that strictly on the CAD output side?
It's strictly on the CAD output side. There are really no GP or GIS requirements or dependencies on the ECATS side.
I think there may be some shape files required for the
I think that's for
wireless routing analysis. So they're taking like the tower sites, and I forget exactly what the layers were, but there is some, and they request that as part of the project.
Yeah, and overall it's not, but yeah, to Jessica's point, there could be some GIS analytics that they look at from a boundary perspective. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I have one quick question.
Yes.
As we move forward and we're assigned a project manager, GIS is really trying to bridge the gap between our law enforcement and our you know, transition to next gen 911. So is it fair to say, we also, we're gonna have to bring in our IT departments into play when we are setting things up, initially?
So I would say whomever's doing your GIS, whether that's your IT department.
It's all,
Okay, so if it's you, then absolutely. And then the state is also giving you access to GeoCom now, if you need to engage them to assist. But yeah, whoever's doing your county GIS or whomever, you would engage at that point
okay,
and start working your sets.
We're not the ones that are gonna be stacking and racking them.
No. You're just, you're data layers, you're mapping, you're root center lines and you're, all of those things.
so, but bringing in IT into the picture, helping this process. Sooner rather than later.
Much sooner rather than later. Yeah, that's the best policy.
And typically the PSAP will engage their IT department, just because they're aware of like their networks and their systems and things that will be impacted by, like the NG9 and the installation that's going on. So they'll be involved at some point. I don't know if it's necessary for the GIS data specifically, unless there's some concern with like your data systems that you're using.
Okay. Yep.
Other questions on the status? Anybody?
One more slide.
Let's So the implementation update. So let's walk through this just a sec here. So again, as I mentioned, the grant sites, we're going to give them priority in scheduling and migrations. But again, I want to caveat that by saying, we don't stop scheduling other sites that we can get into the schedule and work as a result of that. But those with grants, we do want to make sure that you all know we got you on the priority. So we've engaged additional resources to assist in our ABPN delivery. That's been a little challenging, as I mentioned before. And so we've got a couple of different sets of escalation teams that are now watching certain orders daily to drive them through. And then we'll continue to use them on sites where we find we're having some ABPN challenges, but we introduce those resources to help drive that completion. As it's also been mentioned, GeoCom's now been made available for GIS onboarding assistance via the EGDMS, which is the eAssignment GIS portal. So they'll have access to take county data layer sets, work them with the counties, and then load them up to the eAssignment where a match rate can be done. And then you can see where you're at from the GIS perspective. I would say that working with GeoCom, I think a lot of counties will see a lot of improvements on their match rates because that's kind of going to be their job to make sure that they're assisting you all to get where you need to be from a match rate perspective. Okay. We're expecting an additional 30 plus PSAPs to go live this year on AT&T eAssignment. And so we have been aggressively scheduling and aggressively driving dates for a lot of the sites that we feel very confident we're going to get done this year. And that all kind of goes back to the ABPNs. Most of everything that is in this bullet point is in reference to a lot of the network that we already have landed at your sites. Okay. So again, we're driving for that 30 plus additional this year. We could get lucky and do more. And that's our hope. From an ECAS perspective, the install training and schedules in general, we're syncing that in real time with our schedule. So again, kind of back to the previous slides where we're trying to bring that number together where we see the completions of ECAS against the completion of the eAssignment projects. That's where we're going to try and drive that to be more efficient, cleaner, and faster, and more together. That way, we don't have a lot of, we got to eAssignment done. We got all these ECAS issues. We're still working. We want to try and bring them together where we can actually bring a project to closure around the same time. Now, it won't always happen that way. We totally understand that, but the goal is to get that as close as possible. Okay. So as I mentioned before, several sites still awaiting the CDR connectivity from the CPE providers. So this is where we need your help. So we've seen a number of sites where we've sent ECATs out. We've installed the device. You all have worked with them to give them a public IP, through your ISP cloud, whoever your ISP provider is, whatever the case may be, to get them access to their cloud. They can see their RDDM, they're ready to go. We're waiting on the CPE provider. And so what we found is, we've asked, and the CPE providers will say, well, we'll see what we can do. Weeks go by. And we're asking again, have you been able to, no, we haven't been able to get there yet. And then weeks go by. So what we're asking is on the project calls, I've asked the project managers to give ECATs an opportunity to ask for updates, ask for additional help. But for each one of you at the PSAP level, just asking you to engage with your CPE provider. If we're your CPE provider, AT&T is your CPE provider, we'll drive that. Okay, you won't have to get involved. We will drive that. But if you're with another channel that provides CPE, between you and the CPE manufacturer, we're asking for you to get involved and help drive that to closure. So, if you're on the project calls and you hear that, we're just continuing to beg for dates or for CPE providers to get out there and get that CDR spill provided to us, we're just asking you to help us drive it with your vendors. Because there's a, if we're not providing a CPE, that's between you and your provider to get that stuff done. And so we're just asking for your help there. That'll help us drive getting your ECATs done along with your ESINet as we move forward. So those have been some of our major challenges in regards to ECATs, is getting the CPE providers who are direct with you all or might be with an alternate channel provider to get that stuff done. So we're just asking for your help with those vendors. And that'll go a really long way helping us drive completions at your sites. Okay. So we're going to weekly track the installs, testing, and training throughout the deployment. And I've asked the ECAS team to provide weekly updates to me. They actually put me in on their real-time sheet this morning so I can see what they've got going on real time so that I can continue to sync that with the ESINet. So I can see where they're at, where we're going to be on certain sites. Are we running pretty much neck to neck as we get to that go live date? Is there one side or the other needs to be caught up? So again, we're going to do that weekly tracking together on that, on the ECAT side. Okay. ECATs overall from the implementation update perspective, questions? You all, I have not.
There's a comment. Gary Bell, vendor assets were available a year ago to support the ESINet transition that fell flat due to AT&T's schedule. ECATs was a pivot that was not forecast due to CPE providers. We were going to do it all at one time, not piecemeal. Time and support for vendors is an expense, so it's a lot to ask.
Understood. And yes, our schedule has been a little bit fluid in the past several months, but we are working aggressively to solidify that. So again, any help we can provide, we totally understand that, there are certain CPE arrangements where they're going to charge PSAPs, to come do this work and activity. Totally get that. Totally understand. We certainly want to be sensitive to that. However, we still need to get the work done. So we're just asking for your help and your support.
That's all.
All good? Okay. Let's see. Right there.
Yeah.
So before we go on break, any questions at all? Okay, just.
All right, I think we are a little ahead, although I don't really know, it's our first session, so I'm kind of guessing here, but I think we're gonna come back at 2:15. So if anyone needs to take a break, chat quick, those on the phone need to take a break,
Every time.
be back here sitting by 2:15, and then we'll move into key findings, lessons learned.
Explain to me what I need to know.
What did we ever decide with that?
Not gonna affect your
We went county lines for that boundaries, didn't we?
hardware, it's all behind.
That's what,
Or not the hardware, the
what correct?
Okay. Back. All right, so in the next segment here, we're gonna kind of get into the nuts and bolts of a few things regards to, as Jessica mentioned, key findings, a few things, installation, operational readiness testing, migrations, that sort of thing. And then we'll get into a few other hot topics, well, one hot topic later on down into the slide. But let's go ahead. Let's talk about site prep. So this is where we're going to get started with your project. We're going to get going on ESINet. And so some of the first logistical things that you'll want to consider for your site, be looking for additional isolated electrical outlets for your ESINet routers. We don't want to go into your site and plug your routers into big long strips. It's got everything else in there. We'll be looking for those isolated outlets. It's around 3U of rack space for the edge routers and power supply. So not a lot of space. That's gotten far less than, probably 10 years ago. You might have need 5 or 6 RU for some of that stuff back in the day. So about 3U of rack space, and that's about like that. Something like that.
I thought it was next Monday.
And dependent on the telco entrances, and this could be a phone company like AT&T, Frontier, Brightspeed, and some other telephone companies that might serve your local area. Demarcations extensions may be needed for your AVPN circuit. So example of that is where we install the AVPNs to your location. The AVPNs are going to come into your building at the telephone or data demarc. And I say that because there's going to be some companies that we off-net provide through that are data companies. Okay? And they've got a demarc, we call it an IMPO, lots of different things, endpoints, whatever the case may be, where they bring it into your building and they say, okay, right, here's your circuit, here's your label, take it from there. Well, that might be 1,000 feet away from where the edge routers go, where your 911 equipment is. So we'll be talking with PSAPs where that's needed. We have run into this a little bit. There's solutions that can be done. Typically, the demarcation extension it's up to the PSAP to work that, whether it's through an IT group, some sort of in-house group. Some of them may have to introduce a contractor to come in and set up a simple network demarc extension. Then there's a lot of different ways you can do it. If it's within a certain limitation, it's just an extension of an Ethernet. In some cases, they've had to put in a few fiber strands and some transceivers and extend that demarc out. So lots of options there. But we did want to make folks aware that we could run onto this occasionally as we're installing circuits. Now, the good news is we've got over half of the stuff in, and we've only encountered this handful of times. Okay. So it's not all that often, but it could occur. Okay, so the data collection workbook, and that's where Bryce gets ahead of the game. He's calling folks and he's talking to you about your current provider, your speed dials, site contacts, all of these different things. And so want to make sure that that's complete. Want to make sure that it's as accurate as you can up front. Otherwise, we kind of have to stop the project and sort that out. So if you have a question about it, when Bryce or somebody's talking with you about it, do your best to confirm that. The PMs will be reviewing the data collection workbooks with you to make sure that we've got everything valid and accurate before we move forward into the project and go into ORT or operational readiness testing. Because again, if we don't make that good up front, it bombs out further down the road and it just puts stumbling blocks on our projects. So, and then on the installations, the PSAP personnel vendors and local GIS representatives should be present on all of the project calls as much as possible. And this gives everybody a chance to stay up to date on what's needed, what's been done, and what's coming down the road, because certain parties in the projects may not have something right away, but they're going to have stuff coming in the project. So it's good that everybody's in the loop, because then everybody can have a little time to plan where we get folks that take a little while to get on these calls. They find out that, 2 or 3 calls ago, we were looking for a GIS person or a CP vendor or whatever the case may be. And we had action items that we really needed them to start looking at then. So it's best if we can have those people join as much as they're able. Okay. Any questions before I move off this slide? Okay, key findings, CPE. Oh, this is a good one. Call handling. So when your project kicks off, and this is something that you can even do ahead of time before we roll in and start having calls with everybody and start working on ESINet. Your CPE software and your hardware versions may need to be updated. Now, it really depends on how old your equipment is. If it's 5 or 6 years old, there could be some hardware that needs updated to get you to the proper software version where you can do i3. If you've updated in just the past few years, you might be able to just get a software update, or you may already be there. So it's good to have that conversation with your CPE provider. Say, hey, look, I'm going i3. Am I where I need to be in regards to i3 ESINet? Let them give you some guidance on that if you're not aware. But this is really important. This will set the stage for how quickly we can deploy you. Because if you have to read the hardware, there's a quoting phase, there's a procurement phase, a scheduling phase, a deployment phase just for CPE to get you where you can do ESINet. Okay, so this could turn into quite a planning event if you have to do it. I mean, if you have to do it, you got to do it, right? But planning's everything. So get out ahead of that if you haven't already. Resource scheduling really needs to be a proactive effort. And that's because most CPE providers, not all, but most of them are scheduled usually 90 to 120 days out. So if you had a signed contract, you had a PO issue, you went to them and said, I'm ready. They're going to be 90 to 120 days out before they can start working on your stuff. Okay. Now, if you're with an alternate channel, sometimes they can offset that just a little bit, maybe pull that in a little bit, get to you a little sooner. I've seen some of them that do it 45 days. It's the exception and not the rule. So these schedules get really lengthy. So just be aware of that when you're planning. If you know that you're going to have to do a software refresh, really important to get these 2 steps going way ahead of time. That way you're ready. Because if you're not, then we have to figure all of that time into your ESINet deployment. So if it's going to take you 8 or 9 months, you literally have to tack that on. I mean, there's some stuff we can be doing in tandem, but we really can't schedule ORT and those sorts of things until you're well on your way to having that work done. Okay. Okay, so again, AT&T is going to need your support in helping driving those vendor dates as it relates to your direct relationship. So if you have a direct relationship with your CP provider, you're buying direct from them, and you don't have a channel that's providing that to you, or you do have a channel that is not AT&T, again, we're asking for you folks to get engaged and help us drive those dates with your vendors. Because when we project manage the ESINet, and we're not providing the CPE, that's just it. We're managing the ESINet side of that. And we're asking for you folks to get with your CPE providers to get this work done because we don't manage that effort. Okay. We track it with you, but we don't manage that effort. That would be between the PSAPs and their CPE providers. Okay, network design reviews are strongly encouraged between the PSAPs and their vendors early in the project. So when you look at the network that's been requested for your sites, talk with your CPE provider and make sure you're all on the same page that that's what you want. Okay. We've had a few sites that have come to us and said, oh, we're a geodiverse solution, which means we have a location here, down the street, across town. We have another solution, and they connect and they talk. And we want our ESINet traffic to go here and here. In the event that one side goes down or the other, we've got a way to get back. Here's the challenge. We've done that. We've went and installed the network, and then the CPE provider came back within weeks of doing ORT and said, oh, wait a minute, we can't do that. We can't take network over there and over here and make that all work, because we're kind of connected, but we're really not. And so, yeah, we can't work with that. And so now you can see where we're at. We're in a situation where we're getting way down the road. We've got network in place. Now we kind of have to work a situation. We're going to figure out, can we work with the network that's installed, or do we have to go back to the drawing board? And we try really, really hard not to go back to the drawing board, because if we have to go back and reorder circuits, it's just an ugly story when it comes to a timeline. Okay, so it's really important for y'all to have conversations with your CPE providers when you're looking at the network design. Make sure they are in total sync and agreement with what you're doing and what we're doing to provide that network. So GP peering that has to occur between those alternate locations. And that's where the challenges come in, where the CPE providers were not able to do BGP period. Okay. And we do it every day with a lot of providers. It's pretty much a standard design when you ask for it. But again, have that conversation. If nothing more, do a trust but verify with your CPE provider. Hey, this is my network design that AT&T's provided. Can you work with that? Are we good with that? Do that early if you can. I mean, we'll certainly ask the questions too. But from a PSAP perspective, it's best to check that off with your CPE provider. Okay, data exchange workbook. Oh, another important one. So the data exchange workbook, this is where we collect all of the information from your CPE provider on how we're going to interface with our routers. So IP schemas, all of that good stuff. Your CPE provider needs to fill this data exchange workbook out before we can provision our routers and send it out. Okay, so if we've got our network in and we're waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for your CPE provider to get this back to us, our routers are sitting in a warehouse waiting for your site.
Troy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I am with Laura.
Okay, good.
I just would like to understand better.
Yes.
Who are you exactly waiting for? Do you have a list of who you're waiting for with the CPE vendors?
Well, it could be the vendor direct.
Yeah.
It could be their channel.
For the counties,
It could-
who you're waiting for on this stuff?
It would be either the provider direct, or it could be the channel involved.
But do you have a list of the counties that you're waiting for information?
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood the question. I could go back and pull that in
I
probably.
think that'd be great to
Yeah,
have.
we could do that.
From our perspective, we try to be on those calls with
Sure.
you.
Sure.
So if you're waiting for something from us, that's what we need to know.
Okay.
And I would say probably every CPE vendor out there, but I would hope that every CPE vendor would feel the same way.
Sure. We could probably pull that in. That's really just pulsing the thing and saying, hey,
Then the counties know I'm good or I'm not good.
Yeah.
Or,
and in most of the PM status calls, we do have a bullet, where we're tracking dues, data exchange workbook. So we're going to know that. Yeah, we could definitely pull that together, but we are talking with PSAPs on these calls, asking for the due.
yeah, but I think some of the counties are very much challenged with what they know and how, who to go to and how to get that.
Right.
So I think having that list and knowing who you're waiting for would be good to have.
Yeah, we can go back and pull that. That should be, again, pretty easy. And again, it gets a little cloudy if you're direct.
No, we're not necessarily direct.
If a county was, it's easier. If you've got a channel in between, sometimes the lines get blurred onto who's requested who and who's waiting on who beyond that. But most definitely we can go back and see who's waiting on the due. Okay, but the data exchange workbook's really important because it drives a lot of things, right? It drives the router shipments. It drives, if we don't have the routers, we can't do the rack and stack. If we can't do the rack and stack, we can't tie it to the CPE, all of these different items. Okay. Questions about the call handling installation?
There's a question on the chat.
Yes.
The AVPN.
All this.
Will AT&T provide a schedule without AVPNs installed so we can get vendors committed?
Sites without AVPNs installed? Yes, we have all of that in our dashboard. Sure, absolutely. We can provide that.
Last week was a challenge, but we got through.
All right, any other questions on this slide here? Okay. Okay, GIS, Zach, my man. And this is a discussion about your MSAG, and I3 alley comparison, okay? MSAG, old world, legacy, 911. Alley comparison, new world, going to mapping, GIS. So significant, we've seen significant match rate errors have become visible for HMSAG that have existing errors. So this is where when you log into your alley portal on the old legacy 911, a lot of times there'd be an error report where you have certain things that aren't bouncing against your MSAG right. We found some counties that probably had 200 or 300 errors that have been sitting in there for years, maybe. Some sites, some counties, Johnny on the spot on their MSAGs, working it every week, month, whatever the case may be, pretty good shape. And so when you bounce those MSAGs against your GIS, a lot of times in good shape, right? You might be like an 88% compare match, which takes your all of your attributes in GIS and matching up against your MSAG, your AVs as opposed to AVEs, your RDs as opposed to ROADs, that sort of thing. Some of them we've seen it is in the 20 percentile match rate, which kind of tells you that there's some work to be done. So a really important thing, we're letting folks know, hey, an MSAG cleanup ahead of the abstract and GIS match is probably worth your weight in gold when it comes to being ready. Because then what happens if you do have some MSAG issues, then you got to work all that out, right? You got to work all that out, and depending on how far along you are in your deployment, maybe you got plenty of time, maybe your deployment's moving a little forward, a little faster, and you're going to play a lot of catch up and fire drill a little bit. Okay, so some PSAPs, as they work through that process we just talked about, they may decide to utilize what the state is considering a phased approach. Okay, so they say, okay, yeah, my match rate's pretty terrible. It's all pretty much wireline. That where my match rate's popping out and not going very well. And they may decide to just utilize a basic PSAP boundary polygon layer, which basically is a drawing that goes into EGDMS that says, okay, anything that falls in here, route it to my PSAP, and then we'll figure out how to produce the alley. Okay, it's really just the basics to get that call to the right PSAP. Okay, yes.
I actually had this conversation with Zach at the break there a little bit, right in his wheelhouse, which makes sense, but VoIP providers. Where's the MSAG for a VoIP? I mean, because we have issues with VoIP companies right now, and I get there's a third party vendor that goes with all that, but how do we fix that?
So VoIP, I think in times past, there was a VoIP ESN that got established. And there was really not an MSAG entry other than the VoIP ESN that would route those VoIP calls to the proper PSAP. VoIP is actually coming in like wireless with the PANI and that sort of thing. I think if I recall, I had to go back and look at the VoIP. I know that it's still considered not a class of service because we're going to talk about that a little bit. But there is an alternate route or alternate way of routing them in I3. I mean, we're doing it. Could I explain it right now at this very moment? No, but it's been accommodated for. But in times past, there was really no MSAG for them other than a VoIP ESN. Okay, so I know that doesn't answer your question, and I can go back and research a little bit for you, get you an answer on that. But I know that we're handling VoIP. I just can't explain it in detail at the moment.
Back to the
Hey, Troy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Troy, it's Brian Bozeman. Hey,
Yeah.
Just a little clarification. So there's probably three different ways that VoIP providers are handling 911. And I say three because one is there's some VoIP providers nationwide that actually provision their data in the alley like they're a CLEC, like they're a local competitive exchange. And so that is handled just like it is for wireline records. There's no difference. And then I say 3 ways because the other 2 are some VoIP VPC providers, some companies are actually taking the MSAG extracts of the MSAGs from the regional databases and provisioning their records with sort of MSAG valid records if we can. And then there's other carriers that are a little less they're not following the MSAG standards as much. So you'll get addresses that don't match MSAG and stuff like that. So it is kind of a carrier by carrier and really who their VPC is, how they handle that. So I say that with the explanation, but the unfortunate scenario I think that you guys are talking about in the room is what if it doesn't match? You kind of have to go back to the actual service provider and talk to them about what address they're sending in and if they can format into a MSAG valid address.
And thank you, Brian. By the way, Brian's the master on that stuff, so thank you for that. And you triggered my memory on that because of the static versus nomadic. So yeah, a lot of the static providers, like your Comcast and AT&T, they, as Brian described, will provide that as an actual alley that can be matched. But VoIP's a tricky animal. It always has been.
Didn't they just use the port assignment?
I'm sorry.
Didn't they just use the port assignment that's used for distributing that information to operate the VoIP system?
I don't know, Brian, can you relate to that?
So that I missed what assignment? Is it port?
Yeah, the question was, go ahead again.
So for AT&T, all your route information is run through a distribution box that has a port assignment that goes to a specific location. So couldn't you just look back to that port assignment in order to gain that information?
Yeah, and that's how some of the VoIP providers do it. Typically, the VoIP companies are using a middleman, whether that be Intrado or Comtech or Intelliquent/Cinch, that's their new name. A lot of them are using those companies in between. So how they get the address data is one portion of it. Them having the address in the correct MSAG format is probably the biggest gap, right? They're definitely responsible for delivering a dispatchable location, an address for the call, but whether that address is in the properly formatted MSAG approved address format, that's where it gets a little sticky or a little complicated.
Thank you, Brian. That's a great question, by the way.
I have a question online here.
Yes, go ahead.
Can AT&T provide more than just one bulk load of MSAG corrections? This can be a very challenging effort to correct or record one at a time via the web interface.
Yeah, I think we do provide a method. It used to, it was one bulk load correction where you could put a number that, several corrections in a bulk load and submit that. Bryce, do you know if we've increased that? From a one
Instances?
Yeah, from a one bulk upload to multiple.
I believe the questioner is referencing the MSEG refresh process that
Right.
is done through data integrity.
Right.
Yeah.
So they need more than one bulk.
Yeah, and it can post get more bytes at the app.
Yeah, so I think I'd have to, yeah, go ahead, sir.
There are 2 ways to do it. One is, the most preferred way is to go in and retrieve if you're with AT&T, retrieve your MSAG data. And what that report gives you is it gives you 2 lines per action on the MSAG information. The first line is one line you cannot change. That's what it is today. The second line is a repeat, but it's editable. So if you had 1, 2, 3 first LANE, and you want to change on line 1, that would be static. If you want to change that to 1, 2, 3 first LN, that's where you make that edit. You can bulk up, you can bulk do that.
I think the question though referenced more than one bulk upload, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'd have to go back.
Provide more than just one bulk load.
I have to go back to our DIU team and see if they've increased the number of bulk loads that can be done. I know at one time it was 1, you get 1 per county. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
We just recently got bad. We were given one chance.
That's what I thought. I think it's right now it's 1 bulk upload. And that's to keep from overwhelming the folks in DIU on all of the bulk uploads. So right now, I think it's one. I'll go back and just to confirm that, I'll go back to make sure. Okay, good question. Okay, any other questions before I move on? Yes, sir, go ahead.
Just a point of clarification.
Yes.
Your 98% match rate isn't against your MSEC. It's actually against the alley, and it's kind of a triangle of accountability. There we go. That's the word. Where your GIS will be used to correct the MSAG, and the MSAG will be used to correct the alley. And then if you see a problem with the alley, then you go, okay, I gotta make sure it's good with the GIS, and then go back around again. That way, all three data sets are as clean as possible. They kind of reflect upon each other.
So the alley extract is like the final product coming out of the MSAG approach there, I would think.
Yeah, you could kind of look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, any questions? Let me go through this one last bullet. We'll ask questions about the whole thing. So Geocom can be utilized for all of the onboard issues before, during, and after go live. So DMA has recently introduced that. So that'll be a big help to PSAPs needing help with their GIS onboarding. I will say that a lot of states don't do that. So that's a great hand up to help counties get where they need to be on the GIS stuff. Okay, any questions on the installation page? Thanks for all the questions. Okay. Operational readiness testing. So when you hear the term ORT, that's what it means. So ORT is just the process in which we go in. We go through a series of steps to make sure that everything is provisioned, everything works, so that you can go live. So when we're doing ORT, we're asking for PSAP on-site remote support engagement with your call handling vendors. This is really important because you might need some additional provisioning that needs to be done now. In some cases, this can be done remotely with some of your vendors. So talk that over with them. Your CAD vendors, your mapping, and your long-term recorders, those are optional. That's at the discretion of you folks. If you want them to be engaged in ORT to make sure that they're getting a certain spill or whatever the case may be before go live, we don't require them for ORT. That's really up to you folks if you want them to be part of the operational readiness testing. Okay, so the ORT steps and procedures. And by the way, when we complete all of this, you have to lock your system down after it's passed ORT. Okay? No more making profile changes, none of that. It's got to be locked down so that you're ready for go live, because your ORT may be done a couple of weeks ahead of time of your go live. So you want to keep people out of your system to keep stuff from bombing out on go live. We certainly don't want that to happen during go live. So when we talk about ORT, we're going to make sure that the call flow is completed and verified. We're going to check for good audio, both caller and call taker, validation of the proper I3 and alley, including the rebids. We're going to test the CPE functions, which your CPE provider will do that. We'll do that in concert with them. Such as no positions available, which would likely send a call back to ESINet and say, I can't take the call. Holding the call, parking the line appearances, et cetera. You're live on ESINet. We'll be checking transfers, testing both on and off net. Off net is simply a site that's not on ESINet yet. Okay. Including PSTNs, which are just 10 digits and IVR destinations. So as an example, if you needed to do a transfer to the poison center or something that had an IVR where you had to do a prompt, a 1, a 2, a pound, we check that because we don't want to go live and find out it doesn't work when you're on ESINet. So we go through and we test your IVRs. We test those PSTN transfers. We test those on-net transfers where I can get to the next PSAP around you wherever on ESINet. That's the glory on ESINet. You can literally transfer from one end of the state to the other. Not that you would want to do that, but you can. And then some of the off-net PSAPs that are not there yet. We've had some success in getting off-net transfers as a 911 transfer, even out to old legacy selective routers. Some of it's hit or miss because we certainly do try and do that, okay? We certainly try that in every aspect where we're successful to get that done. There are going to be some challenges with some selective routers where that's not available. We've run into that with a few providers in Wisconsin, or we're having trunking issues outbound. So some of those may end up with a PSTN transfer to get the call there. But in every case, we certainly strive to do that where we can provide that off-net full 911 transfer. Okay. We do the network failover between the AVPNs that you have, your edge routers, and then the CPE. A lot of times the CPE folks will want to fail over their side of it to make sure everything stays intact, call stays up, everything's good. This is really important where you have a geodiverse CPE scenario where you've got, server A, which is active, and you got server B, which may be a hot standby. There's network in between. We got ESINet going into both sides. We're wanting to make sure that when one side goes down, the other side on the other side of town, across the street, wherever, can take the call seamlessly, keep it moving, even with the call up. Okay. And then we want to make sure that the abandonment route works on your predetermined plans. So I want to go to the PSAP next door if I need to. We do that in ORT to make sure everything's working. Okay. Any questions here? Yes, sir.
So what we're finding out is that transferring the alley, Annie, that type of information from our PSAP, if we're transferring it over to another dispatch center, that information is not transferring over because of our software.
Is it going to a PSTN, a regular 10-digit number?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So all works, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
How do we improve that? Because we were really excited
From my understanding,
that this was gonna do that, but
You what?
Works.
Currently, CallWorks is saying there's a
Columbia.
limitation with that. I know they're looking at it, and I think it was really specific to transferring to an actual 10-digit destination anyway, which wouldn't send Annie and Alley because it might be poison control, an ambulance service that's not on net. So you wouldn't get Annie and Alley anyway if it got sent on net. That scenario is where they just couldn't do the PSTN outbound across ESINet. They were having to bridge in a local number and conference it to get that to go. Okay.
we're talking more specific, like with like Sauk County. We're in Columbia County and transferring a call to them. I mean, we would like all that information to transfer.
So you said Scott County?
No,
Sauk.
Scott County. Thank you.
we're from Columbia.
Well, and they're going through testing as well.
We're in ORT starting tomorrow. We'll go live next week.
Right. They're going on net. You all are getting ready to go on net.
Mhm.
It'll all be there.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you guys will both be on net. You'll be able to send 911 transfers to them. They'll get the alley. Same to you. You'll get the alley.
Okay. So during the testing, it didn't work, or?
Correct. So we were doing the ORT testing and we were trying to call off of the IVR number
Mhm.
and it would not go through. So then they had us just call the regular number and then the information was not transferring through.
So again, when you're calling the IVR, you're calling a 10-digit number.
Okay.
So there's no way they're ever going to get in and out because it's
Okay.
going out on the PST.
Okay.
It's not on the 911.
So your transfer to SOC is set up as an IVR?
They're trying to. I guess that's how the EZNet goes through, from my understanding. I thought is what they were saying,
Well, so it could be, I have to go back and look at the differences.
because it was an ESI IVR number that they were trying, well, it was a PSN that I was trying to send to, and that was not working.
Oh, that was, okay, so I remember this. So there was an IVR number that we were trying to use. The destination number was not working right. And we changed that. We found another one that we could use. But if you're transferring to SOC via 10-digit number, are you hitting an IVR over at SOC where you're having to go through like a 1 or a 2, or is it 2?
I think it goes direct into dispatch.
Okay, okay. The good news story is, here's the thing. once you get on that, all those headaches go away. So PSTNs can be a little challenging depending on where they're ringing into. And typically, it's not a big deal to go out of ESINet to a PSTN. The only time it becomes an issue is where CallWorks, was not able to do that, and they've had the conference out, which really, they can still get you there.
Okay.
Okay, they can still get you there the same way. Just being able to do the PSTN transfer off of ESINet, all of that network gets tied up on the ESINet, and it doesn't tie up the network through your CPE, through your site.
Watch for that after go live, and if it's still not working as expected, close.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no worries. And it will be a little bit, I wouldn't necessarily call it rocky, but as we work between off-net and on-net sites, as everybody's getting there, we'll run into some of this. We'll run into some of this.
Okay. And you're gonna just go live.
Okay, any other questions on it? Yes, sir. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you had a question. Any questions here? Okay, some more key findings here. So we'll do a pre-ORT, ahead of ORT. This is really just to ensure the continuity is in place. We can put a call through ESINet, it comes in, it goes through the routers, it comes into your CPE and it's answered. So that's really what we do there, just to make sure it's good from point A to point B. And then we say, okay, we're good. We can move on into ORT. Most of the intervals for ORT is 3 to 5 days. It's really dependent on the size of your site. Some of them can go really quick. Everything's in place. It's a simple design. If the sites are a little bigger and they're a little more complex, sometimes, you can use that 5 days will burn up pretty quick. You're going through all of the steps and doing a lot of failover and that sort of thing. So some CPU providers may have limitations on testing certain features in ORT, which can be tested at go live. This was one of those scenarios where we ran into the limitation on the outbound. We couldn't simulate it in ORT, but once we went into go live, that went through that test. So just be aware of that. There may be certain test scenarios in ORT where we show that it didn't pass, but we okayed it for go because there was an agreement that we could test that at go live. Okay, and generally it would be something that's not of critical nature. You can't pass ORT if you can't answer a call and get out. That's it. But something that has to do with the transfer or something like that, that's a different story. Okay, and then identify someone with your PSAP familiar to participate in the test calls during ORT if you're able to do that. Could be one of you folks. It could be your channel provider if you want to use them. Could be your CPE provider if they're on site. Whatever the case may be, we're just asking for someone to be familiar that can help with ORT test calls. Okay. Any questions on this slide? All right, so key findings on the migration. Now we've moved through the installation, then operational readiness testing. Now let's talk about migrations. So the PSAP on-site remote support engagement required. Obviously, your CAD vendors, you're going to want probably to work with them on reparsing your call data. Comes out of your CDR port once you move to I3. It's going to change. So that'll be important for a lot of you that rely on CAD, cooked up to your CPE for populating your call screens in CAD. Pretty important. If you've got any mapping that needs to be parsed for I3. Same thing with the long-term recorders, your LTRs. Obviously, your call handling is the priority here. And your channel integrators, which would be your channel providers, vendors. Again, if AT&T is providing that, we take care of that. That's our job. And then obviously, just like ORT, somebody familiar with the PSAP participate in test calls. Generally, it's going to be dispatch because you only have somebody logged in on this profile. If you've got a different profile set up, or if you've refreshed, you've got new hardware, they'll want somebody to be logged in on the old system, somebody logged in on the new system while we work through the migration. Questions here? Yes, sir.
When will CAD vendors be required to consume the I3 fields?
Be required or asked to? Well, again, I mean, that's really up to the PSAP. I mean, it really depends on how much you rely on CAD, right? Some PSAPs don't use CAD as a live environment, meaning they don't look at call windows that are getting populated with a call. And in that case, I mean, maybe they don't, I don't know. For those that do it on every single call, it's pretty important. So again, if you want them to be part of ORT, they might be able to see some CAD stuff coming in if the CPE provider's got it set up, and they can start looking at the data there. Here's the thing. Most of your CAD providers, larger CAD providers, they already know this. They've already got their parsing table set. So typically on Go Live, they'll go in and populate their parsing tables based on what they've done in other places, and you're in pretty good shape.
Okay.
So it's not a rediscovery. It's most of them have done this enough. They already know where you're headed. But again, it's up to you. If you want them to participate in some ORT and look at some stuff, feel free. Otherwise, on Go Live, have them available. Work that side for you.
I just want to add,
I have, sir.
like a broader perspective, if PSAPs and GIS folks are really interested in the CAD vendors moving forward with the next gen 911 standard, that you start looking at having that in your contracts and your request for proposals. Really, I think from a community perspective, if we drive to that, it will compel the CAD vendors to move in that direction. Because there's, the state can't step into all the CAD vendors and say, hey, you need to start delivering in this format. But the users themselves, I know they will make a lot of changes based on user-driven requests like that. So I encourage you to look at that.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Okay, any other questions on this slide?
There.
Okay, so day of the cut. Usually 1 to 2 hours, somewhere in there, depending on, again, the complexity of the site. We run onto something that's not behaving right, we'll stop, we'll address it. Might be our problem, stuff like that. Before we move along, and a lot of times it's not gating, it won't necessarily stop the cut, but we like to stop, check all the boxes before we move ahead. Okay, so again, 1 to 2 hours or so is, I've seen them go as quick as 20 minutes. But it just depends on the site and your complexity and anything we run onto. So, here's the big deal. So any delays on go live dates could potentially run into some lengthy rescheduling timeframes. And this is for a lot of different reasons. From a CPE perspective, trying to get dates put together, from our ESINet resource scheduling perspective. So again, it's really important for us all to work together and strive to meet our go live dates, and be ready. Here's the good news story. If we grind it out and get through ORT, you're almost there. Because at that point, you can really cut then, right? So we get through ORT, then the getting across the finish line is the migration. But just making sure that we're all staying on track. We try and work with people to get schedules in place. The expectation is that once the date's committed, we stick to it. There's a few instances where, we're getting close to these dates, especially ORT and go live. And we get a call saying, we thought we could support that, but we can't. And that could be for a lot of different reasons, but just so everybody's aware, it's really difficult to move a date a week or two. Okay, it's almost a stroke of luck when we've got, 70, 80 sites in play. It's at one point to actually, now sometimes we can, if we're lucky, we will. But just know that delays can mess us up on our reschedule. So again, we kind of talked about the on-net, off-net. So some off-net transfers may be limited to PSTN. And so then those are just 10-digit destination numbers. Until we get everybody on net. There are some selected routers in state of Wisconsin that we will not be able to do any transfers into. It's just not, it can't be done from a technology perspective because of those selected routers. So each one of those PSAPs will need to utilize PSTN for transfers to get to those particular PSAPs. So when you're working through ORT, you're moving towards go live. It's recommended that that you all notify your surrounding PSAPs that you're going through your ORT and go live. And expect some test calls. So when we're testing your transfers, that sort of thing, just let them know, hey, you're going to get a few calls from me. That's just a courtesy, lets them, know that you're going to be making some calls in there. Here's the biggie. Class of service in the alley will migrate to the I3 format. This is a biggie. So in times past, class of service, you take a call, your alley pops in your window. You see the RESD, you see the BUSN, you see the WRLS, you see the PH2, WPH2. Those are all the old legacy class of service indicators. Okay. We're moving into the new world. None of those are going to apply with the exception of one. That's going to be WRLS. And we'll go into that slide in just a second. But I want to also talk about the creative alternate routes that can produce unexpected results. Review the alternate route destinations ahead of the migration. Understand your call flow. When you look at how you want to route in an alternate route, look at who that's going to go to, how and when it's going to happen. Consider MOUs with your surrounding PSAPs that are going to be your destinations for your alternate routes. It's really a great idea if you review the operational capabilities. So as an example, you do an alternate route to the PSAP next door, 2 counties away, whatever the case may be. There's an alternate call that gets routed or call that gets alternate routed to that PSAP. What do they do with that call? Okay, now that we're in the next gen world, this opens up the whole new world of being able to reach PSAPs in an alternate route fashion. So do they have an understanding of what they're going to do with your call? And that's really important because otherwise they may transfer it back to you. When in the beginning you couldn't take the call anyway, that's why they got it. So really important that whomever that destination is, that you have that conversation, you all are on the same page, what to do with that call. Review alternate route engagement. Now in ESINet, we can do an alternate and a backup option. This is just a play on words. They kind of do the same thing if you wanted to, but they can provide 2 different destinations based on predetermined routes. Okay, this could be a PSAP of your choice. This might be your admin lines if you want it. Okay, so there's a couple different options there to consider. So your scenarios could involve on and off net destinations as designed. So you might may have to, at some point before everybody's on net, choose an off net destination for your alternate route. But just have that conversation and have a plan and kind of look at how that works out on paper if it really got put into motion. Okay, any questions here?
Is it true that you'd recommend having those with the project management team?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because we'll need to know that because that all is part of ORT.
I just want to make
Yeah.
sure that was.
Absolutely. That's really important that this is all really nailed down before we get to ORT, preferably a little ahead so we can plan and provision. Because anything that you decide to do here, we have to provision and ESINet for you. And we don't want to have to stop on the fly and fix that. If you change something there. So yeah, absolutely, Molly. We want to know ahead.
And just to add, you can change them afterwards.
You can.
So let's say you've got your agreements in place, but you decide you want to maybe alternate route to another, like a different PSAP that is now migrated that you haven't been able to in the past just due to select router issues. You would be able to redo your route list at that point too, after you've gone live, if you plan to change any of those routes. The network is capable of sending a call wherever you want it to go, but you want to make sure that the PSAP that receives the call knows what to do with it once they get it. Because there has been instances where, as Troy mentioned, the PSAP will send it back to the other PSAP. Well, it's just going to get sent right back because that other PSAP is still busy, and they've reached their capacity. So you certainly don't want to be sending callers into a sort of round robin like that. So.
And the network will work as designed if you design it that way.
Asbury in Dane County.
Okay,
And worse.
class service, here it comes. Okay, so as I mentioned, when we go to I3, we're no longer in the legacy world. So this is where things change a little bit. Okay. And I know there's been a lot of questions about, well, I don't see my class of service anymore. What happened to my class of service? It's not being delivered. Well, I3, everything with the exception of this guy right here, WRLS, you're not going to see it anymore because it's all different now. It's all being delivered in a pivot flow SIP header that's got a lot of dynamic fields in it. Okay. And it's all by design because we're moving forward in technology. Okay. I'm no longer just interested in it's just a business or it's just a phase 2 call. There's a lot of different technologies behind what type of phase 2 call it is. Okay. So as you'll see, I pointed to work here. And you're going to work. On your WRLS, which is your phase 1, you're going to see this method. It's going to equal cell. Okay. So think of it like this. Method is kind of taking the place of class of service in a way, because there's a couple other factors in here. But on a phase 1 call, you're going to see method and cell. And this is in the PIDFlow SIP header data that comes into your CPE. Okay. Because there's been some questions. Well, how would my CPE provider know? Well, they'll be able to take a snapshot of this PIDFlow coming into their CPE. They'll be able to pick out some of this stuff and could potentially parse it and populate your alley screen with whatever you want to label it as, if they have that functionality. Okay, so this is how they would do that. They would go into these PIDFlow spills and see it. Now, again, all of these are gone. They no longer exist, and there's good reason why. Okay. And what I did on these snapshots, these are all just excerpts right out of this NENA I3 standard document. Okay, so you can literally go to the NENA site, pull up this I3 standard document and see all of this info. I'll have a couple other tables in here, but it's all in there, okay, as NENA standard for I3. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like in a way. So you'll see the phase 1 coming in. It's going to have a method of cell, which tells us phase 1. It's a wireless mobile call. So we know by looking at that part of the PIDFlow that it is phase 1. Now, a phase 2 call comes in. There's a method, okay, and now it's going to reference these tables in the NENA I3 standard guide, okay. The reason that is because, again, there's so many dynamic ways that they'll be able to deliver phase 2 that it's basically tabled out, okay? And the way that that's going to come across is if you look here in the method, then it's going to tell you the method. This one here is the device-assisted AGPS, okay? And then we can go on the table and we can reference that. When I went into the table, it had a value of 18, and we'll look at the table here in just a second. We can also see that it's wireless mobile. So we know it's wireless. It's going to be phase 2 because I don't see a cell here. It actually tells me how it was delivered. And so that's another way that your CPE providers can see this information, is to make a differentiation between phase 1 and phase 2. Okay. So again, if your PSAP CPE isn't displaying class of service correctly in regards to whether or not it was phase 1 or whatever the case may be, have that conversation with them. See if they can take a look at that data and see if there's something that has to do with parsing on the PIDFlow. Questions here? Kind of getting down in the nitty gritty of it here, but I wanted to put this out there so everybody can see the differences between the legacy and the way we're going I3.
Yeah, Troy, just to mention, the reason we specifically wanted to talk about the class of services is I think from the dispatcher, the telecommunicators perspective, this is going to be the biggest difference they're going to see after go live is the difference. How do you tell the difference between a phase 1 and a phase 2 call? In NENA I3, it doesn't matter what type of call it is, the location is the location, or at least that's the end. And until the service providers, the cell phone carriers can start delivering more accurate location information from the device itself, we're really reliant on that phase 1 versus phase 2. Is it a tower site or is it the actual caller's location? So to work with your call handling vendors, making sure that they're able to translate it how you want it to be viewed by your telecommunicators, whether that's a phase 1 or a phase 2, or however you want it labeled. These are the avenues that they can take to take a look at that and actually reparse that information. And as Troy mentioned, there may be some limitations with their call handling vendor. We've found some workarounds. This is quite honestly the most common question we get after go live is the cost of service differences.
That's correct.
And so we're going to be going live next week. We use Intrado, and this was a big topic of conversation for us. And what we decided to do was we wanted to see the different things coming in because it might be useful information in the future, but it's a lot different than what we see now. So we worked with Intrado. They're going to color code it for us. So when it comes in as a cell, it's going to be yellow. Anything that comes in as a phase 2 location is going to be green because essentially that's what the telecommunicator needs.
Yep. And that's where they're grabbing it. They're looking at this pin flow, determining that value. Yes, sir.
One thing that we were able to do to help out our communicator when they couldn't tell what the class of service was, is we work with our vendor to change the layout of the alley presentation window to include the radius that comes from the pin flow so that you can see that.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
If it's like, 10 meters, yeah, you consider that, phase 2. Phase 2 is 0, or like 1,500 meters, shall be phase 1.
That's a great point.
And is that, what vendor is that?
Silicon.
Silicon, perfect. So each vendor is gonna have kind of a different way of doing this. And so it's difficult for us to come out and say like, this is the end all be all solution, because it's really gonna depend on what call handling vendor you have.
Yeah, and that's why we say have that conversation, right? Have the class of service conversation with your CP provider, see what creative solutions they can give you.
Just a question here. What county are you from with the color coding?
Sauk County.
Oh, you have this, sorry. You have the color coding with Intrado?
Mhm.
Yeah, somebody screams.
Okay. All right, so here's a little more of the table. Okay. And as you can see, and I think what you were talking about is you wanted to see this stuff here so that you knew kind of what the technology was that was sending you that call. And so as you can see, these are pretty much phase 2 deliveries on that can happen on different technologies. Okay, based on the wireless providers and the devices and so on and so forth. Here's what we did. We took a snapshot of a live PSAP in Wisconsin all night. And as you can see, the method was a DBH. And by the way, I want to thank Brian Bozeman for helping me out with this. Brian, if you're still on, I do appreciate your help, sir. So if you notice the DBH, you come over here, that's a value 40. So this is a hybrid device-based call. Now, if you asked me what that meant, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. It's one of those technologies within phase 2. But this is the type of information that's going to come in the pit of flow. But again, phase 2 could come in any one of these flavors just in this snapshot. Okay, as you can see, this is value 33. There's several on up. I'll show you a few more on ahead. This is why you're not just going to get a PH2 anymore, WPH2 to signify phase 2. It's because of all of these different technologies that could send you that call. And so this is the foundation for next gen 911. Some of these may not be used at all yet. Some of them might be. Again, when talking with Brian, we see a lot of these value 40s for the hybrid based device. So, or the hybrid device based. So that could be sort of an industry standard type of thing. But again, this was the capture out of a PSAP in Wisconsin. And as you can see, we've got the service of mobility or mobile and then the service type wireless. So we're still looking at a wireless call. Now we see the method in the phase 2. Okay, so that's wireless. Here's what your residence, your wireline would look like in pit of flow. This turns to manual. Instead of a device name or cell, it just goes to manual. The service type is going to be Plano telephone service or POTS, and it's going to show fixed instead of a wireless or a wireless or mobile call, really mobile call, because it's fixed. Same thing on a business line. You see that it's business, it's fixed. It's got a manual indicator, VoIP residence. This comes up manual, but this is going to come up with an unknown. And this is a VoIP thing. typically this unknown 86 is that when I read up on this, that typically reflects that the VoIP provider, the VoIP service provider also provides the infrastructure for that call. So this could be a Comcast or an AT&T or some other provider that provides that wireless, or excuse me, that VoIP service, not wireless. Residence PBX, business PBX, residence PBX, you might see potentially at maybe a university or something. Business PBX speaks for itself. But you'll see here, it's got the service type of LTS. It's residence or business based on the business PBX. It's fixed. And then the same with Centrex. Okay, so at least now you can kind of see the differences between how the class of service is now mapped to the I3 PIDA flow that now comes from ESINet into your CPE. And this is all dynamic, right? Especially in phase 2, that stuff's all dynamic. Questions? Does it make sense a little bit? A little bit. This should answer the question as to why you don't see the class of service indicators like you would have seen it in legacy. It's all different in I3. And to Jessica's point, your CPE providers can look at this because a lot of PSAPs had questions about, well, how would they know? This is where it would be. It would be in the flow. I think we're down to, yep, that would be it. Any questions? AT&T stuff overall. Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for letting us come.
Thank you.
Talk with y'all, you folks. I do appreciate it.
Yeah.
If I can.
Is there any other questions just from overall Next Gen 911, GIS, grants? If there's anything online, yes, as you can see, our information's up there. It also has Zach and grants information if you have more specific questions that they are probably better at answering.
Is it printed out anywhere where we can get it?
We will be sending out the slide deck I don't know how soon. My hope is within the week. But it may be possibly early next week, just depending on how fast we can get it online. All right. Well, I just want to first thank everyone again for joining us here today. It was great getting out and about. We haven't coordinated these outreach sessions in quite a long time. So I just want to appreciate or extend my appreciation for everyone making it out today. Hopefully you found this really informative. If you have suggestions for topics at future sessions, we do have the July 18th session coming up in Lincoln County. Not coming up, it'll be a couple months, but thank goodness. These are increasingly difficult to coordinate, but we're really looking at these as open platforms, ways for people to provide us feedback on how the project's going, as well as really just want to get feedback on what kind of topics you'd be interested in hearing as we go. Allison, you said there were.
Yeah, I want to get in the next round of NG9 grant opportunities released.
So those are upcoming. We've got the workshops coming up April 16th. Those are posted to our website on the event calendar. You can also reach out to Grant Gowalski. He can send you the flyer for that information. And that will also give general timelines on when to expect the grant announcements coming out.
How long will they be open?
Longer than last time, that's all I can say. Yes, we are giving more time for application processes, just recognizing the difficulties we encountered last time, for sure. All right, well, thank you, everyone, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Travels.
Yes.